I'm writing this intro as I have most of the rest of the script done, and I am already over 16,000 words. Well, in for a penny. This is the first stop in my weekly journey to remaster my rankings for Death Battle Seasons 2 through 7. Seasons 1 and 8 were already done recently enough to where I have nothing new to add to them, but the rest of the seasons have my old awful rushed text-to-speech style of video making, and I am a lot less happy with my Season 7 video than I remember, so I want to give them all the time they deserve. This season above all else I feel deserves it, because it's responsible for some of my favourite episodes ever, as well as keeping me invested in the show. It was the first season I watched as it came out from beginning to end, since I only started the show around the tail end of Season 1. I'm not going to let my rose-tinted glasses get in the way of this ranking though. Even though I'm not looking at these episodes quote-unquote objectively, there are still plenty of episodes here I dislike in spite of the amount that I love. I mean, it's the longest season, so that was kind of inevitable. So, which episodes did I like the least, and which did I like the most? I mean, returning viewers already know the answer to the latter, but it's about the journey, not the destination. Probably shouldn't stretch this intro out any longer, let's start off now. Otherwise, by the time I finish, they might end up using another animated film character, the Horrors.
The truth is, we've been kidding you. We've been hiding the truth from you all along. Darkwing
did not actually lift the whole 60+ ton tree off the ground.
Oh boy, Beast vs. Goliath, the episode with hardly anything to say about, all of which I've already said in a different video. At this point in production I saw that I was approaching about an hour's worth of script and I still had a third of the season left to go, so I don't think I need to go too in depth on this one since it's already one of the shorter episodes. It's a short, boring, albeit mostly well animated fight scene which completely butchers Beast and Goliath's characters by turning them into wild animals. The death is alright, but it comes out of nowhere, the analysis is fine but could have done without the extended clips to pad the runtime, and also fuck this episode for inventing the concept of bringing up a feat in the analysis, and then doubling back and saying, well actually, in the conclusion. This episode is as filler as it gets. It came in between Snake vs. Sam and Iron Man vs. Lex Luthor, so already it was going to have a hard time standing out, but I don't think that would change if it was between, say, Fulgor vs. Sector and Batman vs. Captain America. There is nothing worth remembering about this episode, and there is nothing more worth saying about it.
So, the other day I was cruising the internet and I learned about waifus.
After how bad the episodes with Horny Boomstick were in Season 1, you can imagine that Ivy vs. Orchid was not a rewatch I was especially looking forward to. And right out the gate, Boomstick doesn't even make it past the fucking intro. The episode is at least not as sleazy as Rogue vs. Wonder Woman or Chun-Li vs. Mai, but I do not like many of the jokes in the analysis. Sector jokes like this are not my kind of thing. It's not impossible to make them work, but when Boomstick is being horny, I get sick of it real quick. Quite frankly, I'd rather have a Boomstick's dad joke, which is saying a lot.
Zombie pirates don't make good fathers. Believe me, I know.
That was not an open invitation. Yeah, okay, so this is the episode that invented the Boomstick's dad joke, so fuck you for that. That said, I actually didn't mind it here. Even in retrospect with Sarge being Boomstick's dad, it makes sense that Sarge could be seen as both a pirate and a zombie given the events that happened in Red vs. Blue, or he's just talking about one of his stepdads. I didn't laugh, but it was an okay enough joke, which is more than I can say for the rest of the analysis. Except the bit in the sidebar freaking out about Orchid opting for Tonfa over lightsabers, I liked that. The animation has the one other joke I liked in the episode where Ivy does the super shadow.png to Orchid's flash finisher, and then they explain that as an actual advantage in the conclusion, and then Boomstick's horny again and ruins it, thanks. The rest of the fight is as white noise as it gets. Well animated, but filled with more Season 2 jank than any of Lang's other fights. Sad that his weakest fight scene ended up having to be his last for the show. Orchid throws her Tonfa in a fit and then magically has them back in her hands when Ivy hits her, cool. I guess the ultra combo at the end is good, the killing blow is also pretty good. You know, for as boring as the rest of the fight was, I at least like how it ends. No wait, the epilogue shot has Orchid killing her brother by flashing him. Okay, no, you've gone and ruined it. Next episode, please.
The Okada was my favourite episode for 2 whole months, and this just destroyed it.
Fulgor vs. Sector came out at about the only time in my life where this match could have possibly disappointed me. Sector was my favourite Mortal Kombat character off his design alone at the time, and I was really excited to learn about the other cool looking robot that I'd never seen before, and credit where it's due, the analysis was actually alright. Not particularly funny, but it covers the characters well enough. The conclusion, on the other hand, while it's not Goku vs. Superman 2 or Ben vs. Hal levels of awful in how they explain the winner, I would hardly call it good either. What it comes down to is that Fulgor is heavier and could overclock his reactor whenever Sector got the upper hand. Even though they say Sector could outmaneuver him and that the overclock leaves Fulgor wide open. Also, Fulgor could have taken his rival down if he didn't have help, while Sector didn't. Maybe if they showed anything that Jago did that would make him more impressive than Sub-Zero, that would actually mean anything. But no, I guess Fulgor just beats anyone who loses to their rival. Take the fat L, Vegeta. Is the fight any better? not really. The setup is Sector running to God knows where, bumping into Fulgur who's just chilling there while invisible for some reason, and then they fight. Top tier writing right there. So much of the rest of the fight confused me for the longest time. Are these lights Sector's meant to be swinging on? Why is Sector leaving after images when he isn't even moving forward? Where did the missile that Fulgur reflected go? Why doesn't the background change for this shot that's at a different angle? They're on a bridge, not in a box. And even when things do make sense, it's never fun to watch. Fulgur gets bodied the whole time, lands 2 short combos before the end, and spends half his time standing still to charge his reactor. Good god, nothing interesting happens here. I think Fulgur using his I-beam on the missiles is the only bit of the fight I liked, even if the change of perspective was weird. And I guess I like the lightsaber sound on the pulse blades too. Then we get to the ending, which has the best and worst stuff in the whole animation. The combo leading into the compactor is slow as shit and doesn't get across Sector speed well at all, which the rest of the fight was at least able to do despite being boring. Fulgur holding the compactor open is actually pretty tense, and I love the bit of him using that opportunity to finish charging his reactor and bust out. Then he does a boring ultra combo, which I would have sworn before this episode was an oxymoron, but I guess not. The devastation beam finisher is solid, but god, the lead up to it is as monotonous as it gets. I can guarantee that this wasn't 37 hits, but I am not complaining that it didn't go on for longer, because it is already so slow and low energy that it puts me to sleep. Sorry, Sai, but your second favourite episode behind the goated Danny vs Jake is just a bit shit, innit? I promised him this was guaranteed to rank above the bottom 3, but I didn't expect to like Gara vs Toph more, so, sorry for the false advertising. But also your favourite episode is still Danny vs Jake. You don't get to be upset about this.
Luckily, her aura is durable enough to take a punch that shattered a concrete pillar about 4 feet wide.
I liked Yang vs Tifa for the longest time, but after revisiting it for the first time in years when I did my Blake vs Mikasa review, I now finally get why this episode is so widely hated. I don't hate it myself, and I don't really agree with the mindset of an episode being bad solely because the verdict is easy to disagree with, but how this episode was handled rubs me the wrong way. With them teaming up with Rooster Teeth, getting Yang's official voice actress, and ending the fight with a banner hanging above Tifa's corpse advertising the show they spent the whole analysis segment gushing about. It's hard not to see this episode as probably the most overly corporate one they've ever done. Not counting that one DBX anyway. Not like the episode was great with that aside though, because visually this fight is far from the prettiest thing to look at. The models clash, the textures and colouring on a lot of models look really ugly, the characters' hair and clothes are flapping about the whole time. This honestly might be the worst aged 3D fight of the season in the visuals department, and that is including Terminator vs Robocop. Analysis wasn't great either. Like I said before, they gush over Yang and her series while Tifa gets a bunch of unfunny jokes about her breasts. Thank god this didn't come out in season 1, because I doubt that would have ended at just a mention back then. Though at least Tifa's analysis is the one joke that I like in the episode. I mean, it's not all bad at least. It's a Torian fight, so of course the fluidity of the animation is top notch, the choreography is great, the music slaps despite it adding to the corporate feel of the episode, the sound effects make each hit feel impactful, and the climax of the fight is really exciting. There's certainly a lot to like here, which is why I did like this episode for so long, but the entire episode feels like one big ad to show how based Yang is at Tifa's expense, and I can't get behind that anymore.
Beast did not actually lift the whole 60+ ton tree, even if it isn't connected to the ground.
Gara of the Sand vs Toph left me pleasantly surprised. I expected to strongly dislike it, and instead I only ended up regularly disliking it. Well, not the fight anyway, because as fun as the banter is and as solid as the voice acting is, I can hardly call anything about it good. Oh wait, actually these Toph sprites are custom, I am just learning, so props to it for that. The rest of the fight though... The stopping and starting constantly leads to some poor pacing, the action is generally boring and sometimes even confusing, Toph's metal wires never even acknowledged in the analysis, these sound effects can look awful at points, and they turn a conceptually cool death into one of the worst of the series. The analysis is what saves this episode from being quite possibly my least favourite of the season. As much as I didn't care at the time, now that I've seen Avatar, it makes me so happy to see an analysis of my favourite character in the show. Especially since both in her analysis and Gara's, the jokes are actually pretty funny. Wiz says no to nonce-like behaviour in an Avatar episode. What a novel concept. I sure hope he never goes back on that. Thankfully he stopped Boomstick before he could even start, but where were you literally 2 episodes ago where he started being quirky about Kirby in an even worse way? The conclusion sadly doesn't continue this trending quality, with Toph's victory basically boiling down to she can see Gara. Damn, how's Gara ever gonna beat an opponent who can see him? Might as well just forfeit before the fight even starts. Yeah, I know they say she can bend as sand, but also they give no indication that she's fast enough to even move in time to redirect any attacks. Nor do they say anything about how Toph would not be overwhelmed by how much sand Gara has at his disposal. Maybe Toph can block enough sand to cover a village moving at the speed of sound, but the episode doesn't get that across very well. But then Boomstick has has 3 ending puns and continues even after Wiz declares Toph the winner, and it's funny, I like it. Had the analysis not been a lot better than I expected, I would have easily called this the weakest of the Avatar death battles. It doesn't have character bastardization as bad as Aang, even if Toph disrespecting Sacred Ground doesn't seem like something she'd do. It has the best analysis of the 3 because it doesn't have sick Wiz or half a dozen Boomstick's dad jokes, but it has easily the weakest animation. Aang vs Ed and Zuko vs Shoto, while I don't like them overall, still have their moments. Gaara vs Toph doesn't. A good analysis can save an episode with a mediocre animation, but not one this outright bad. Not a fan, but I didn't hate it, so that's something, I guess.
I don't want your damn lemons. What the hell am I supposed to do with these?
Luigi vs Tails is an episode I know is on everyone's shit list because of the large radish thing. And even though that's far from my only reason for disliking this episode, it is still one of the worst arguments in the entire show. Not only because uprooting it is what gives them the trouble rather than just lifting it, but also that entire game took place in a dream anyway. In fact, the entire conclusion's kind of ass since they try and play Luigi off as a weakling despite saying in the sidebar how he has superhuman strength earlier. Would have been nice as well if we got an acknowledgement on how Tails would react to Luigi's lightning powers, given how his fear of lightning is brought up in the analysis, but whatever. The rest of the analysis is nothing special. Tails 1 had a few alright jokes, but it was really up to the fight scene to carry the episode, and it did not. It has a few highlights. I really like how Luigi accidentally blowing himself up leads to him using the environment in a way to rocket back up and hit Tails harder than he could otherwise, resulting in the one time it feels like Luigi gets a substantial advantage. Every other time he hits Tails, it feels like it does nothing, either due to weak sound design or because Tails doesn't even react. Meanwhile, anytime Luigi's hit, he gets sent on his ass. I guess I kinda like the bit at the end as well. The negative zone was neat to see. I like Tails using Luigi being blinded as an opening to rig the poltergust with a bomb, and he gets to use more of his gadgets near the end, which is pretty cool. But then we get one of the worst deaths in the series where Luigi gets punched in the stomach once, and there is no and, that's the entire thing. Tails looks like he might be in a rough spot as well with his tails catching on fire, but no, he's fine in the next shot, don't worry, it's epic. The rest of the fight I didn't mention gives me little to talk about. It's slow, boring, Tails spends ages doing nothing, Luigi gets bodied, it's just not really that enjoyable to watch. When Luigi turns intangible, not only does Tails still somehow hold onto him, but he grabs his hammer which is not also invisible for some reason, but Tails does nothing as he sees it slowly swing around and hit him in the face. Such a good scene, I must say. I had surprisingly less to say than I expected on this fight, but I guess I never see anyone talk about this episode outside of Radish Moment bad, so I'm not exactly sure how much of an impression I expected it to leave. It's not even so bad I can spend ages ragging on it, it's just kinda bland and boring with the occasionally pretty good scene, and the occasional fucking stupid one. Topped off with a mediocre at best analysis and a shit conclusion. No, it should not be remastered for episode 200, or ever for that matter, go away.
When Captain America throws his mighty shield.
I'm trying to make each segment here about 2 minutes long, but how do I do that for Batman vs Captain America without just copy-pasting what I had in my review of the first 3 Batman episodes? This is an episode I dislike, but not even to the point where I can bully it because it's just a whole load of nothing. Well animated maybe, but it's boring, the ending to the fight is really dumb, and the conclusion implies Cap is exclusively a boxer despite them making a point of his martial arts skills earlier. The animation has the occasionally cool moment that lasts about half a second, the rest of it's so dull that it leaves less than 0 impression on me. I have had this unfinished script in front of me for about 10 minutes now and I still cannot think of anything to say. It's a bad episode, but at least it's not as aggressively shit as everything below it. It's somehow longer than both Killer Instinct battles with no horny boomstick as an added bonus. The death is weak, but not nearly as bad as Sector's or Luigi's. It isn't a blatant corporate ad, it doesn't bastardize the characters quite as badly as Beast vs Goliath, and it has a fun enough analysis for Cap to almost bring the episode up from bad to okay. I am drawing a blank on anything else I can say. Odds are if I had anything else to say it was already mentioned in my Batman Trilogy review. If you really want to hear me talk about this episode of all things, then go check that out I guess. But I highly doubt anyone cares enough about what is essentially the epitome of filler to go do that.
But beneath the mask lies the scars.
Lex Luthor went from a god-tier episode to a mid one upon his return in season 8, but he merely adopted the mediocrity. Doctor Doom was born into it, molded by it, raised by it, by which I mean his first episode is about as bland as his second one. Darth Vader vs Doctor Doom is as nothing special as this season gets. The analysis is fine with 1 or 2 jokes I thought were solid, and some good music which I can't imagine these characters being without at this point. Obviously Doom didn't have his MVC theme against Lex, but can you imagine a Vader episode being done nowadays without the Imperial March, that just wouldn't feel right. The fight starts solid enough with some well done animation and some really cool scenes. In particular, I really like Vader sensing the invisible Doombot and smashing it against the camera. Then the real Doom shows up, kicks Vader's ass in 3 hits and only takes a single hit himself, which was only landed by sheer luck. I like the death, but the rest of the second half of the fight is a complete ass kicking on Vader's end and it is not fun to watch in the slightest. The only thing the tail end of the fight does better than the first bit is that it takes place in a brightly coloured background where Vader isn't nigh impossible to see half the time. I used to really like this episode, but the more I think about it, the more I realise the bad stuff takes up about as much time as the good stuff. It's half a really solid animation and half a complete wash that averages out to a mediocre fight overall. And while I enjoyed the analysis enough, it still couldn't bring me to actually call this a good episode. Much like Doom's other episode, this is a flat 5 out of 10. I still probably slightly prefer this over Lex vs. Doom though.
Thanos was an incredible foe, especially while wielding the Infinity Gauntlet. Unfortunately,
This is what Guts does every single day.
Guts vs. Nightmare is an episode that everyone seems to either have in their top or bottom 5 of the season. Regardless of what their opinion is, they typically feel very strongly about it. I do not. I think it's an alright episode with a forgettable analysis that ends with the one joke I liked in the whole thing, and a fairly solid fight scene. Despite the lack of memorable moments for the first chunk of the fight, I love the sound design all throughout. Every swing of their swords feels weighty and above all else, deadly. The loud metal clangs make it sound like these two are hitting like flaming semi-trucks to the face. And on the topic of overarching positives, the rigging is very good. The fight is super well animated. I love how smooth all the movements are except for Guts at the start here. Things start picking up when the fight begins its second phase. We get an example of Guts going for a big attack, not taking his own safety into account. Then Nightmare gets flyier and starts stealing the show. He pins Guts against the tree by spamming his laser as he slowly approaches, then stabs him and sends him across the forest. It's such a good first impression for Night Terror, I love it. I also like what follows it, with Guts jumping through the firewall to take Night Terror out in 2 quick sword swings. Sucks that he went down so easily, but it really helps emphasize the effectiveness of his sword. That would have been a really cool end to the fight, but no, we had to keep going. We had to get bitch-ass Cinder Killer Instinct making it a little too hot, so Guts had to put on the Berserker armor and then the animation's over 10 seconds later, hooray. I hate this ending. For as much as they hyped up the Berserker armor in the analysis, we never got to see it do anything. We never got a scene where Guts has to fight in spite of broken bones or major blood loss. He never even takes a hit while he's in the armor, and he takes Cinder out in one shot, so he doesn't even have the chance to do anything else. No, I don't care what his actual name is, he'll always be Cinder to me. And then there's the conclusion, which I don't even want to start with. While I don't care about the accuracy of the verdicts, especially not for season 2, and especially not for series I care this little about, I still want it to at least make sense by the logic they themselves present in the episode. They have Guts win because he's beaten foes stronger than him before, but nothing they say gives him anything that could match Nightmare's castle destroying feat. Best they give him is being stronger than a cannonball, which, yeah, that's not gonna hold up compared to that. What's that? Guts has to drink the entire ocean in one go? Well, this is what Guts does every day. He literally drinks water. Of course he's gonna succeed here. Bottom line is, I like the episode, I guess. The fight's mostly good, but the ending sours it. It's fine. Moving on.
Archery! Archery! I choose archery.
Given how standout the other Marvel vs. DC fights were this season, except for that one, fuck you, Green Arrow vs. Hawkeye is disappointingly very average. I don't think it's bad like a lot of people apparently do, but it is nothing special, not the least bit. The analysis is good enough. It has the Avengers and MVC2 themes, which made me happy to hear. The joke about Nick was alright as well, and Hawkeye also has one of my favourite end clips, so it has that going for it, I guess. The fight is also just good and not much more. The boxing glove arrow bit was funny, I like the tornado arrow countering Hanzo Overwatch's scatter arrow, the melee combat bit was alright, and I do like how unique it is compared to other fights, primarily being long ranged. There's nothing I fully dislike until the sucky ending, but the rest of it's just basic cape shit with the occasionally fairly good scene. This episode doesn't give me much else to say. It's good, I liked it, but it doesn't really do anything outstandingly well or insultingly poorly. It is just an episode that exists.
Don't believe us? Well, strap in, boys and girls. Let's look at how Superman breaks reality. One day, Superman lifted a solid gold oak tree.
What can I say about Goku vs Superman 2 that hasn't been said before? I don't want to go into the analysis much because that especially has been talked about to death. The documentary style analysis is interesting, even if not particularly entertaining, and it has one of the worst lol random jokes in the series. The conclusion on the other hand is awful, and if you need me to explain why, then I envy you. I'm aware of Nem's video where he talks about their clear bias to Goku in this episode, and I can definitely see where he's coming from and I agree with him to an extent, but it doesn't bother me as much as it does with him, since I can tell they thought it was a necessary thing to do. They knew the shitstorm that was coming their way and saw gassing Goku up as a way to reduce backlash, which is fair enough I guess. Show respect to the loser and all that. Would have preferred if Superman got that same respect too, but this video is already long enough without me going into that. I'll have Nem's video linked in the description if you want that aspect of the episode further broken down. The fight scene on the other hand is actually really good. I love the music all throughout. Alive by Brandon Yates is one of his best vocal tracks, but I don't want to undersell the tracks they use from Bayonetta 2 and Attack on Titan, which contribute so much to the grand atmosphere and the scenes they're used in. The canyon fight is excellent, the ending has one of the most visually stunning shots in any death battle. The animation is visually much nicer than the first, but it also feels like it's doing the bare minimum. Compared to the first, which had them using everything in their arsenals, this is just a standard cape chip fight between two bricks flying at each other, despite how enjoyable it is. It's not free from having some garbage in it either. There are some really bad lines of dialogue that feel like they misrepresent the characters terribly. Goku's ending lines come down to mind with him demanding Superman to get off his planet and refusing to back down like some fucking bloodthirsty maniac. And don't even get me started on the King Kai scene, which is one of the worst scenes in the whole show, since it exists solely to hammer in the point that the conclusion's gonna make in a few minutes anyway. On its own, I think this is a pretty good episode, but as a follow-up to the original, I think it falls short in most regards. It doesn't feel like it has that same passion put into it as the first one, and it especially doesn't have the same feeling of mutual respect for the characters. The fight scene's pretty good, the analysis is whatever, and the conclusion is terrible. If I didn't have significantly more stakes in the animation than the analysis, this would be much lower. But the fight's fun enough to get this into the decent enough tier.
Barnaby here, Chester. Finley Foxford.
Holy shit, Fox is Koro-sensei. There isn't much to Fox vs. Bucky. I think it's a mostly solid episode. Fox's analysis is really enjoyable, though I sadly didn't care for Bucky's. None of the jokes in his one landed for me, and a third of it was just his theme song. I appreciate being introduced to a new character, but they didn't do a good job at getting me to want to check out his show or comics. Fox's analysis at least picked up the slack with more jokes I liked, a more interesting dive into his history and arsenal, and also incorporating memes from his series in a non-forced way. Boomstick brings up the barrel roll, which was correct, and that leads to Boomstick bringing up the wolf line in a funny way. And the death of the Star Fox series is offhandedly mentioned in a sidebar rather than having a big song and dance made of it. The fight's good, though not super interesting. I like how their arsenals bounce off each other, and the animation's well put together with the sprites moving around in a 3D plane, but these sprites are kind of an eyesore with how blurry they are. Fox was mostly just a Smash Bros self, but unlike Ganon or Zelda, that's at least semi-justified with him not having too much more to work with. Though maybe a full scene with them fighting on their ships could have been a cool way to get around that. The only moments in the fight I think are outright bad are near the end. Fox using strategy to launch himself towards Bucky feels weird after they make a point of him not being very smart in the analysis. Then Bucky sits and lets him use the G diffuser and doesn't move when he has ample time to do so. I quickly forget about that when the kill happens though, because my god, it's incredible. Fox tackles Bucky to the ground, chokes him out with one hand, and uses the other to charge his pistol, which he uses to blast Bucky's head into pieces. This could have been a basic a la carte head explosion, but no, they have him get slowly choked until he stops moving with an unsettling sound effect, and instead of getting his head vaporized, it gets splattered all across the ground with chunks of it getting everywhere, his brain being exposed and a trail of blood being created. That's nasty as hell and I love it, one of the best kills in the series. Were it not for the kill, I don't think I'd remember this episode very well, but that one scene alone has guaranteed that I will never forget it.
Who is worthy to be trusted with the secret to limitless power to become the Dragon Warrior?
No one knows.
Ragnar vs. Soul is one of the very few episodes carried entirely by the analysis for me. The fight scene isn't bad, but it's nothing special at all. It's well animated, the sound design's good, the combo strings make sense given that these are fighting game characters. I like the fake out near the end, but there's never any point where I'm invested at all. The ending seems like it could have been cool if not for the silhouettes, and the death is one of the lamest in the show. Also, instead of having any hand-drawn stuff, they have this, and it's really jarring. The analysis though, I mean, I hear it gets a lot of shit because it's hardly the most respectful to BlazBlue, and that's fair. Both series get made fun of, but I won't pretend like Guilty Gear got the much better end of the deal here. But as someone who doesn't know or care about either of these series, I love this analysis. Or mainly Souls. I acknowledge that Ragnar's is not very good and gets a lot of stuff fundamentally wrong, but it's still a fairly entertaining dumpster fire for me to watch, and Souls generally is one of my favourites in the season. It was interesting to learn about these characters, and above all else, the jokes landed very consistently for me. There are so many iconic lines here, from the belt count joke in the conclusion, the blue robo-penis, no one knows, and who could forget the crown jewel of this episode, the That Man interaction. That's barely even scratching the surface. There are other solid lines here that I don't hear people talk about much, like Boomstick bullying Junbei, the fire seal bit, so on. This seems like it will end up being one of the shorter segments because there isn't really much for me to say. Animation's fine, analysis is super funny, good episode, I enjoyed it.
That's right, Boomstick.
Now to cover the remastered episode within this remastered video. Is Boba Fett vs. Samus remastered better than the original? Well, that goes without saying, but do I like it more than the original? Oh, absolutely. The original, while I still enjoy it, is entirely carried by ironic enjoyment in the fact that it's from Season 1, giving it a special charm and some serious leeway. The remaster has none of that classic Season 1 charm, but it's better in about every other conceivable way. The analysis is solid from beginning to end, much better than the first. It retells a few jokes from episode 1, but either expands on them or retells them with deliveries that aren't funny for the wrong reasons with two hosts that now sound like distinctly different people. And the new ones are mostly funny, save for Boomstick being horny again. The hosts are fleshed out more now, but clearly they still haven't ironed out all the kinks yet. The fight's also good. This isn't exactly Torian's finest showing. I mean, there's some jank at points and Samus hardly gets to do anything in the Varia suit, but the fight is very much still enjoyable. The Varia suit section isn't exactly the most exciting. I mean, it's not even a minute long, has the worst bit of jank in the episode, and a good bit of it is just Samus running, but I guess it still has its moments. Samus's punch into the X kick where the music cuts to sell the impact is great, and the bit following the stiff looking kick where Fett reveals that he let Samus get in close so that he could drop a grenade and pull the pin as he was sent off is awesome. What follows with Zero Suit Samus is even better. In no other episode are we ever gonna get a lightsaber duel. It's probably not something Samus can do, but it's a callback to Haloid, which makes me happy, so it gets a pass. Though more on that later. The lightsaber combat's great, though it doesn't leave much to say. This bit of the battle does have some dumb moments, like the only part of Samus' suit not being destroyed by their grenade being the closest part to the explosion, though again it's a Haloid reference, so I can't be too mad. Samus clashes with a lightsaber with her foot somehow, and also here's Samus dodging the fire by jumping into it. The death is one of the biggest mixed bags in the show. I like that it's a callback to the original and it is animated better, but also Samus using her pistol as an ice gun and charge shot is not something they established that she can do, and they don't have a Haloid reference to fall back on here. Oh, and looky here, the episode isn't devoid of ironic enjoyment. Here's Fett's corpse shattering in a way that I could totally see being posted to Twitter in 144p with something in impact font over the top. One last thing on the fight that isn't a specific scene but more an overarching thing. I like how the characters' outfits show the progression of the fight. Samus' side of that, I mean, it's kind of obvious, but rewatching I noticed that the X kick makes Fett lose his scarf and gun, and this kick here makes him lose his jetpack. Between that and all the ammo he uses up for his weapons, and you get to see a visual representation of Samus wearing his arsenal down over the course of the fight, that's pretty neat. And to close it off, this episode is indeed a tribute to the late Monty Oum, who unfortunately passed away around the time of the episode's production. It's a shame such an inspirational figure in the realm of internet animation died so young, so seeing this episode pay homage to him with a message at the start and the dance at the end was really nice. That bit at the end made me happy in a way few other episodes can, and it for sure makes me like the episode more than I would otherwise, even if it isn't one of the main parts of the video. This is a very good episode that might be a little short, but it's still a great tribute and a good way to show how far Death Battle had come in its first 5 years. Though Ben has joked that they've come so far since then, that they'd have to remaster the remaster at this point. But seriously though, please don't, twice was enough.
You dare interrupt my tournament!
I expected Shao Kahn vs M Bison to be filler that doesn't stand out at all compared to the amazing episodes it's sandwiched between, and yeah, while it is overshadowed by a lot of the season and it isn't one of my favourites like it was back in 2013 when it first came out, this was actually a very fun rewatch. The analysis has quite a few jokes that I liked. They poke fun at supplementary Mortal Kombat material, and I like the jokes relating to Mike Tyson. There's also the Captain Bison bit, which I expected to drag, but I like how it was just completely ignores Boomstick and carries on afterwards like nothing happened. Speaking of stuff I thought I'd dislike, there are points in the animation that have them spamming the same attack, but given how they do exactly that in their boss fights and they even make a joke about it in Bison's analysis, I don't mind as much. What I really like about this fight is that despite having a 3D background, they stay true to the spirit of classic fighting games by having it take place on a 2D plane. There aren't a whole lot of moments that really wowed me, but the fighting's well paced and the sound design lets the hits feel impactful. And just because nothing took my breath away doesn't mean there weren't standout scenes. I like Khan's taunting leading to him taking a really nasty hit that leads to him not doing it again for the rest of the battle. I like how Bison tries to brainwash him, but he is instead non-verbally told to get fucked. And the final Bison transformation is really cool thanks to the music that accompanies it. What follows it is probably my favourite scene in the whole animation, where Bison starts bombarding Khan from all angles and gets the leg up on him, but Khan is able to adapt to it and quickly starts to block more and more hits until he can land his own counter-attack. Unfortunately, after that is where things go south because final Bison gets warded worse than base form Bison, and I don't like that. It's actually worse than I remember. I thought it was Khan dominating him in a back and forth fight. No, he punches him once, hits him with the same move 4 times, then hits him with a hammer another 4 times, and then Bison dies and Khan vores the soul as Bison's hand and cape float next to his legs. A good finale to the animation could have pushed it a lot higher, but it kinda leaves me feeling disappointed once it's over, which doesn't reflect how good the rest of it was. I really enjoyed the part of the fight with base form Bison, and the analysis was really fun. Maybe Khan should return against a superior opponent so he can get a chance to have an even better... I really did write this before Akuma vs. Khan got teased, didn't I? Oh boy.
I need a monster to claw with that there Kirby!
Kirby vs. Boo has some of the highest highs and lowest lows out of anything in this season. The analysis is whatever, some jokes were alright, but I could have done without Boomstick saying that Kirby couldn't suck him off. That is worse than the dad jokes, I hate it here. And the entire conclusion is pretty poor. Kirby can throw 3.5 tons of mass at escape velocity. Cool. Why not bring up either of their planet busting powers that you mentioned before? Using a calc that by your numbers comes out to not even town level should not be a deciding factor in a match where the opponent is someone you say can come back from planet level explosions. I also don't like how they lean into the lol, the character you thought would lose based off their appearance is actually won, isn't that quirky? Aspect of the match. They've done it before, they've done it since, I do not think it's funny. The rest of the analysis is generally entertaining, but nothing too special. The fight on the other hand, that's the good shit. It is the only other Dragon Ball death battle to even approach Goku vs Superman in terms of the sheer speed of the action. From beginning to end, this fight has plenty of great action that gets better and better as it goes along. The Fat Boo fight is good, but the Kid Boo segment of the battle? Oh man, that one scene where Kirby has to defend himself against Kid Boo's onslaught of attacks? That is one of the best sequences of the season, I love it. There's a good use of squash and stretch to convey the speed the characters get launched at, the sound design lets the hits feel as impactful as they should, the biggest hits have the music cut out to sell the impact, it is all very well put together. I also like how the environment's used to give Kirby his power-ups. Admittedly, I wish either Hammer or Sword could have been swapped for something more interesting to give more variety. Probably Hammer, since Sword has my favourite shot of the Fat Boo segment, but Fighter gets the best scene in the episode, the Star Rod bit is great, and I like the foreshadowing to Hypernova when Boo is in the stomach dimension. So those are all good. Speaking of the stomach dimension, that unfortunately leads me into the fight's glaring negatives. Fat Boo summons Kid Boo directly, which isn't how that works, but I'm fine with it since I don't expect him to have 20 episodes worth of Boo's different transformations in the middle of the animation. But then Kid Boo pokes Fat Boo and he dies instantly. So if Kid Boo can one-shot Fat Boo and Fat Boo could still hold his own with Kirby within the animation, how does Kid Boo not just instantly explode Kirby too? I'm not saying that as a reason Boo should have won, because I don't know if he should and I don't particularly care, but it does create a big inconsistency in the animation and that kinda bothers me. The deaths suck as well. Fat Boo's death was just a poke and an explosion, so it was terrible even if it didn't throw the animation's internal consistency into the garbage. And Kid Boo's is him staring slack-jawed as he gets launched into the sun with a short sizzle as he's instantly vaporized. I know vaporization's about the only way to kill Boo, but at least have the energy ball blow up the sun or do something to make it look like he doesn't go out like a bitch. Kirby's side isn't free of issues either. While I like how expressive he is, there are some points where he feels pretty out of character, which is impressive given there's not much of a complex character to fuck up in the first place. I like when he eats all the candy at the start, his expression when he gets Boo's powers is funny, and I can buy him crying over the Star Rod, but the bits where he's terrified of Boo don't seem right to me, especially the one where he shits himself out of fear. The basic bitch enemies I can buy being afraid and their expressions are funny, but not Kirby. I know I've ragged a bit on this episode, but it's still great. It's just let down by a few glaring issues. Though I don't think it's any stretch to say that out of this season's 4 big controversial episodes, this is by far the best of them. Oh, and Ben Singer unboxing the Super Saiyan God Goku pop vinyl gives me life. This ad's amazing, which is not something I can say about most ad breaks in the show.
My favorite death battle is Green Lantern vs Ben 10.
Oh boy, Nem's not going to be happy about this one. Godzilla vs Gamera is a great episode, I loved it, but I can hardly call this episode amongst my favourites. Aged visuals usually don't bother me quite as much with episodes prior to Deadpool vs Deathstroke, but Christ, this episode gives Link vs Cloud a run for its money with the title of stiffest movements in any 3D death battle. The models aren't great either. Gamera's is fine, but Godzilla's is not that. I don't care that it doesn't match any specific Godzilla one-to-one, but the eyes make it look really goofy in scenes where it is probably not supposed to. I really wish this episode could have been animated better. Not that Torian did a bad job by any means, this is all stuff very much out of his control, but it is very clear that the resources he had gave him a very steep hill to climb, much more so than his previous episode. Had this been done with better models that could move naturally, this honestly could have ended up in the top 5, because what actually happens in the animation independent of the wonky visuals is fucking stellar. The only parts I don't like are the nuclear pulse not being conveyed very well, and some shots feeling like they have parts missing that lead to some jarring cuts. There are so many references in this fight to various moments throughout both characters' histories, and fans of them are sure to love that. I am unfortunately not one of those fans though. I've seen a collective 6 Godzilla films, 4 of which released after this episode, and 1 of which is the retconned one. And Gamera is a series I have absolutely no experience with, so all these references are lost on me. Nemesis covered them all on scene selection though, so I guess go watch that if you want them pointed out. That said, I don't need to know what they're calling back to in order to find the scenes cool, because this has some excellent standout shots. The drop kick, Godzilla using using his atomic breath to slow his descent, Gamera slamming Godzilla back down from space, and that godlike finisher where Godzilla rises from the seas and breaks through Gamera's shell, who sadly blows himself up in a last-ditch effort to save the planet. Oh yeah, this is the only episode to end with the loser killing themselves, which is pretty dark. This is what I wanted from Genos vs. War Machine, but no, we needed the quirky don't talk to me scene. That was vital, apparently. And you know, as wonky as the models look, the atmosphere set by the night sky and the storm more than make up for the visual flaws. Not quite at Carnage vs. Lucy levels of ambiance, but it's not too far off. The analysis is also super fun. Outside of Bimstick calling Gamera a nonce, the jokes all landed and I enjoyed learning about their stories and goofy moments throughout their histories. I was never bored, which is extra impressive given how little I know about these characters. The music's great too, especially on Godzilla's end, and I think that added to the atmosphere of the fight as well. Sucks that I can't put this as one of the season's best, but I still enjoyed it. Hopefully Nem doesn't crucify me for the relatively low placement.
Mega Man.
I've never understood why people hate Mega Man vs. Astro Boy as much as they do. For once, it's not even solely because of the verdict. The animation's what I hear get called bad the most frequently. Admittedly, I haven't heard anything from that in a while, so I don't know if the consensus has changed at all, but from what I've heard since it came out in 2015, this may just be the most overhated episode of the season. The fight is fun, it's fast outside of some moments of dead air, it makes good use of their different powers. There aren't any moments that jump out as amazing or anything, but the hits that need to have impact have impact. The butt guns bit is funny, and I like Astro's reference to the old Mega Man title screen at the start. I'm especially impressed that it turned out so well given that it was allegedly animated in the span of only 2 days. That tight time frame means I'm not going to be as bothered by stuff like the extended period of silence at the start, but it also doesn't mean I'm going to let it off the hook for stuff like the weak and confusing death, as well as the entire segment of the fight that's taken almost directly from an old Flash animation. There are other smaller issues like the Metal Blades running out of ammo way too quickly, but those two things I mentioned before are the only parts I consider outright bad. Not that the time slip scene is bad on its own, I just wish the choreography wasn't directly taken from another fan work. The analysis is also fairly enjoyable. It's funny, has some good background music. Much like the fight, I enjoyed it a lot. The conclusion's also one of the better ones of the season in regards to giving more concrete numbers for both, even if it's weird they never bring up how Mega Man could exploit Astro's weakness to heat. You can definitely make the argument that he's too slow to hit him, or it's unlikely for him to land on the atomic fire out of all of his weapon options, but it probably would have been a good point to at least acknowledge. This isn't an exceptionally amazing episode by any means, but the fight scene's great, the analysis is great, it's a great episode overall that I think gets far more shit than it deserves.
Good night, RoboCop.
The biggest issues with Terminator vs. RoboCop can be summed up in one word: age. Aesthetically, this fight is aged horribly with ugly textures on the models, some stiff animation, and some stuff like RoboCop's awful lip syncing. But this was Torian's first ever death battle, so I'm not going to spend ages tearing this episode to shreds for that, especially when the issues are blatantly obvious to anyone with a working pair of eyes. I'm not going to judge an early season 2 episode as harshly for having poorly aged visuals, especially since what happens in the fight is actually pretty cool. This is a really fun gunfight that manages to make good use of the city set piece, and there are plenty of great scenes. The shot of the two bulletproof characters walking towards each other not flinching at being shot is an awesome way to start the fight. I love when RoboCop plugs Terminator's minigun with his own bullets. I like when he sends Terminator down into the fuel truck to show how clever he is and how effectively he can use the environment after he lectures the Terminator on all the crimes he's committed while setting him on fire. And there's the badass moment at the end where he stands and takes all of Terminator's plasma shots, counting them down until the gun runs out of ammo so he can get the upper hand back. RoboCop doesn't get all the cool stuff though, Terminator really shines towards the end. He has no issue ripping his own arm off to get out of a bind, and he continues to go after RoboCop until the bitter end. This leads into the fantastic death where Terminator drops his iconic line before RoboCop sends him up with the jetpack and he self-destructs. The jetpack kind of appears out of nowhere, but oh well. There are smaller things too that I can tell were references based on what they brought up in the analysis. Terminator's fuck you line and RoboCop's gun spin at the end to name a few. Also, I don't think this one's a reference, but RoboCop's scan has cool sunglasses as a note on Terminator, and I love that. The analysis is really fun as well. It goes over their stories in a way that got me wanting to rewatch the RoboCop movies and finally getting around to watching Terminator 2, so props to it for that. It also uses clips that are edited to be funny rather than dragging on for too long like in Beast vs. Goliath. Overall, a very well done episode that has more than enough substance to make up for the poor visuals. This was a great start for Torian, and it was mostly only uphill from here on out.
Well, this defies all logic!
Tiger Zord vs. Epion's an episode I thought was universally loved for the longest time, but recently I've seen a lot more people say they take issue with it. Some people take issue with Zex's characterization at the start of the fight, but I don't particularly mind it. Not only do I not know Zex well enough to tell when he's out of character, it seems like it's leaning into it intentionally for the sake of comedy and matching the campiness of Power Rangers, which I think works. The only other reason I've seen for why people hate this episode is disagreeing with the stats and outcome. Not sure why people were expecting Season 2 to have that all figured out when they didn't until Season Season 5, but whatever. As for my own take on the episode, I had a great time with it. The animation's fun, albeit not the prettiest thing to look at with those crusty Tigerzord sprites, and also when it does the stomp, the leg looks hilariously bad. Epion's speed edge and the Tigerzord's overwhelming strength are conveyed mostly well, barring that one moment where Epion no-sells an attack while off guard, but again that plays into some effective comedy, so I don't mind. The humour in this episode is all around pretty strong actually. I can't think of any jokes I particularly disliked, both in the animation and the analysis. This is also one of the first episodes of the season to have voice acting, and it's a mixed bag. I'm not too into the voice for Zex. No clue if the impression's good or not since I have no idea what he's supposed to sound like, but even if it's spot on, I do not like how he sounds after the "I'll break your face" line up until the ending. Tommy and Saba on the other hand are voiced very well, especially the former. His screams especially are super high energy and they get me even more invested in the exciting battle. Then there's the ending, which is stellar. It has its issues for sure. I'm not super into the initial Mega Tigerzord transformation and I wish it didn't get one shot, but the rest of this ending is so good that I honestly don't care. Epion dodging the big fuck off laser as white reflection plays is a really hype scene. I love Saba's final line, and the killing blow is one of the best in the show. It may have been a one shot, but there's so much build up and you get to see Epion putting everything into that one sword swing, so I don't even mind that much. The Tigerzord falls in half and the top half explodes with this fucking horrifying death scream that makes it even more impactful. This is an amazing ending to an already great episode. If it was visually cleaner and didn't have as much stopping and starting during the battle, this could have gotten quite a bit higher, but I still love the episode the way it is.
We're gonna kill all the characters like no one ever did.
With Pokemon being one of my favourite game series, it was inevitable that the Pokemon Battle Royale would be right up my alley. The analysis here is short, but still solid. I liked all the jokes except for Boomstick saying Venusaur's sleep powder should be used as a roofie, and hearing them talk about Pokemon was nice in general. Despite being one of the series they've used the most, their appearances are fairly spread out, with only 1 or 2 episodes per season at most, so it's not like it's been done to death like Marvel or DC. Oh yeah, and there's the Blastoise origin bit, which is more iconic than the episode itself. I can understand if some think it goes on for a bit too long, but I think it goes on for just long enough to be funny and not too long to where it gets boring. Especially since this is just at the start of Blastoise's analysis, so it isn't interrupting anything. My only other issues with the analysis are fairly minor nitpicks, like how they list types they resist as ones they're super effective against, and how they say Blastoise is super slow while showing it has average speed in the sidebar. Nothing too major though outside of that one joke that I mentioned earlier. The fight's also really well done. The setup gets across the rows of the fight well enough with the 3 of them being leveled up by rare candies exclusively, and their fighting styles are all well conveyed. Charizard has a focus on offense, Blastoise mainly uses defense, and Venusaur hangs back to use status moves. The sound design is solid, making the damaging hits feel meaty while the hits Blastoise blocks have a metallic clank to show that they're not doing any damage. The choreography is well put together and it's well animated, which is impressive given how little they had to work with in terms of sprites. The ending also goes way harder than it has any right to. The final showdown between Charizard and Blastoise feels super climactic, and we get not just one but 2 of the best deaths in the series. One for being really creative and one for making me feel really bad for Venusaur getting burned alive. I also like how that leads into its flower becoming a tumbleweed which sends dust at Blastoise to wake it up. That's neat. There isn't too much to say in the way of negatives really. Of course with sprites this limited there's going to be some jank, and it being early season 2 means that stuff like the firewall isn't going to look great. I guess the first half of the fight isn't nearly as good as the end. Not that it's bad, but the only standout moments are the beam clash and Charizard weaponizing Blastoise's shell. It also has some moves portrayed in a kinda weird way. Blastoise using Iron Defense is treated like Protect, Skull Bash doesn't take any time to charge, and I'm not sure what move Venusaur's meant to be using here. If it's Seed Bomb then they should have exploded, and if it's Leech Seed then it shouldn't have been portrayed as just a normal attack. There's very little about this episode I can call outright bad. It's not hitting the highest peaks of the show or anything, but this is about everything I could have wanted in a Pokemon death battle. It's no longer the best of those, not even the best one in this season, but considering how the other non-Charizard episodes turned out prior to season 7, it's a miracle this turned out as good as it did. Maybe they could do this kind of thing with a different generation someday. If they did Gen 3 I would be so happy. I wouldn't turn down a battle royale between the Regis or the Evolutions either.
Time to win this!
Ragnarok?
Ryu vs Strider has one kick-ass fight scene. Despite the very short length of it all, it feels like it fits in a lot and has plenty of great moments. Ryu gets to show off so many of his weapons and Strider's able to counter all of them with his cipher to reflect what they say in the conclusion. The battle has a very nice pace to it, with attacks constantly being thrown out at high speeds. As soon as one attack is done, they waste no time sending out something else to stop the pacing from slowing down. The one exception is Ryu's bomb arrow, which goes on for maybe a little too long, but everything else is really fast and exciting. With slow motion being used effectively to help some some of the close calls they have feel even more tense. It's also capped off with one of the best kills of the show, which just barely missed the top 10 when I ranked them all. What it lacks in gore, it more than makes up for with an incredible one-stroke duel that pays homage to the Ninja Gaiden games. And they even change it up from the usual one-stroke duels by having Strider use the hit he got as a means to follow up with a full rushdown on Ryu, rather than having him die to the one slash. And said rushdown brings them back full circle to where the fight started. That's so cool. There isn't much to say here. It's a short but very effective fight that I love. It's for sure one of Lang's best. In regards to negatives, all I can really say is that the swords feel like blunt sticks sometimes, given how they don't cut on contact until the very end. For some reason when the episode first came out I thought it felt really one-sided and that Hiryu never took a single hit, but like, no? I'm convinced younger me either wasn't paying attention or was just watching a different episode. Other than that, my issues with this episode all stem from the analysis. Not that the analysis was bad, I still enjoyed it, and Ryu's in particular had some solid jokes, but both segments feel like they end pretty abruptly, and overall it's not that funny compared to the episodes that preceded it in this season, and the conclusion has them saying Ryu's sword can cut people like butter as if that's a property unique to the dragon sword and not just a thing swords do. They also pronounce Hiryu's name wrong the whole time. Doesn't bother me quite as much as with Genos since I don't care nearly as much about Strider, but it does still distract a little. Also of course them saying Ryu so much is gonna get them bonus points, but they're not talking about him, so it's not the same. So let's go over the episode where they actually do talk about him.
Ryu was not
Ryu vs Scorpion's a great episode that was so close to being amazing. It was doing so well up until the fucking terrible ending where Scorpion slowly walks up to Ryu, decides not to avoid the big fuck off laser, and then comes back and incinerates Ryu, who makes no effort to avoid the attack. The conclusion sucks too. I don't care about the verdict being quote unquote accurate, but I want them to at least maintain some kind of internal consistency. They give Scorpion nothing for stats while saying Ryu can obliterate skyscrapers and dodge bullets. So Ryu is stronger, faster, and has the Raging Demon, which they say can kill Scorpion, yet Scorpion is for some reason given the win. The Netherrealm argument doesn't really work since it's something that happens over time rather than instantly, and nothing is stopping Ryu from just blitzing him and one-shotting him with the instant hell murder move. It sucks that the episode is to end on such a sour note because the rest of it's superb. The analysis is so fun and informative, with plenty of great jokes like Karate Star Wars, the diarrhea joke foot, the entire tangent about weird Mortal Kombat spin-off properties, and also I love this bit of Scorpion falling down these stairs with the music that plays over it. The fight continues the episode's high level of quality, with plenty of fast and fluid action with a very nice visual style. Given how a lot of the episodes following Lang's departure could look a bit rough around the edges, this one having much cleaner sprites and backgrounds is something I was very happy to see. I think the fight's greatest strength is its pacing. Ryu takes the edge at the start, which forces Scorpion to bring the fight into the Netherrealm. As Scorpion goes stronger, he gains the upper hand, even matching a Hadouken, which he couldn't do before, and that forces evil Ryu to come out. We get one of the rawest scenes in the show where Scorpion's sword is broken by Ryu standing and taking it, and then Scorpion gets bodied some more until the Netherrealm makes him strong enough to start matching evil Ryu blow for blow, and then do the bodying himself now that he's no longer so far below Ryu that his piercing weapons can't do anything to him. Ryu sees the Satsui no Hado isn't working, so that brings out the power of nothingness, which gives us a good fake out, showing what they say in the conclusion about how raw power alone is not enough to beat Scorpion. Everything else about the ending still sucks though. Actually no, I like the penguin animality in the epilogue shot, that was funny. It's such a well choreographed animation. Everything flows naturally and there's plenty of fun action to stop it from ever getting boring. There's also some pretty good rigging and lip syncing animation which I can appreciate. They also didn't have Scorpion shit himself when he got hit with the diarrhea joke foot, which is good because that could have gotten cursed very quickly. And there's some solid hand-drawn stuff. Or maybe this just came with their sprite sheets, I don't know, I can't be bothered to check. Hell, I thought this fight had voice acting for the longest time, but it doesn't. The official voice clips they chose just match that well. If I'm to nitpick anything in this battle, sometimes Scorpion will have pupils and that bothers me. I guess the first Hadouken doesn't feel too impactful since we don't get to see Scorpion react to it. I don't know, there really isn't much to complain about outside of the bad ending, and I guess also this limp as fuck fatality from Scorpion. Easily one of the best sprite fights of the season. If only they didn't kill the comfort character.
I miss my balls!
Well guys, it took me a while, but He-Man vs. Lion-O finally clicked with me as much as everyone else. I think I was way too hard on this episode before. Like, yeah, it's visually dated, some sprites are blurry, there's some jank, and some lighting in the 3D backgrounds goes haywire, but I think I let that hamper my enjoyment of it too much before. The only things I actually dislike about this fight are Lion-O blasting He-Man into the distance and then being confused about where he went, and the death, which is a single stomp and then He-Man holds up the Eye of Thundera and it shatters without him even moving. Actually, to get all the negatives out of the way at the start, the conclusion's also not very good. They compare He-Man's strength to a peak human instead of Lion-O for some reason, and they also have, so the Eye of Thundera could have easily obliterated He-Man if given the chance. Anyway, so the power sword can deflect basic projectiles, innit? Barring all that, I love basically everything else about this episode. The conclusion might suck, but the rest of the analysis is so good. It manages to include so many great jokes I feel we wouldn't get nowadays. Like, the chain mending bit would most definitely be a cutaway where Boomstick repairs a chain with magic to give them something to talk about in Wiz vs Boomstick, and it would end with painfully unfunny slapstick. The animation is just as funny. It captures this 80s feel that few other episodes have a claim to. It's campy as hell, and I'm all for it. It's really fun. Plus, there's some great character animation. I know I said there was some jank before, but I more so mean the way that the fight shows the differences between them super well. Lion-O's constantly using all these tricks and gadgets to gain the upper hand, and He-Man just brute forces his way through all of it. Lion-O isn't completely outclassed though. He manages to make He-Man bleed and even gain the upper hand at points, including launching him away, which leads to this fucking awesome scene where He-Man chucks an entire mountain at him to finish the fight. This insane display of strength was something only outmatched at the time by Dragon Ball characters on the show. And even nowadays, the animations rarely show off the character's strength this effectively. Coupled with a super satisfying sound design and Lion-O obliterating the mountain to show his might as well, this scene is so good. And as much as the death doesn't do it for me, I love the bit where He-Man walks through the beam. It does such a good job at making you second guess who's gonna win, which is shocking given that one of the characters is lying bloodied and beaten on the floor. The music's a big part of that. In fact, the music is a big part of what helps a lot of moments stick out here. Every time He-Man does something cool, they play that a bit of his theme song, and I love it. Oh, and I love that they were able to include Battle Cat. His whimpering leads to a great setup, Lion-O getting to show off a power he couldn't use against He-Man, and then a funny bit at the end where you remember, oh yeah, He-Man did punch his close friend into the stratosphere, didn't he? I wish I could have seen what made this episode so special sooner. It's a lot better than I gave it credit for in my ranking of the premieres. It's not a perfect episode, but it captures a mix of both 80s charm and early Death Battle charm so effectively in a way that no other episode holds a candle to. Still wouldn't have gotten number 1 on that premiere ranking though. Dante vs Bayonetta is still a little better.
Creativity like that is why Sega's still making consoles.
It still astounds me that Chuck Norris vs Sega to Sanshiro is not a dated mess. Chuck Norris memes were basically already dead before the episode even started production, and Segata was one of the lesser known characters they'd ever used. But by god, they pulled it off beautifully. This is such a fun episode and the prime example of how to do a full-on gag match. Minus, copping out on the verdict. They've done goofy matchups better than this, by which I mean a single one. But in terms of a full-on gag episode you'd look at and assume it was a shitpost, this remains uncontested. The analysis is so good, diving into the wackiest shit these two can do, and it's reflected so well in the over-the-top, well, I can't even say fight, because to them this is essentially the warm-up. As soon as they start fighting for real, it's so destructive that we can't even keep track of it as an audience. The level of destruction this episode brings to the table is almost unmatched, and it's exceptionally well paced in a way that would make Ryu vs Scorpion blush harder than I do when I watch that episode and see Ryu. The gradual build-up from street tier destruction to the obliteration of celestial bodies makes every set piece feel more grand than the last, with some excellent sound design and rubble to make every impact feel heavy and destructive. I somehow went into this for a whole 6 minutes in my Macho Man vs Kool-Aid Man review, and I said about everything I wanted to say there. So there's no need to drag this out for too much longer when this video is already going to break the hour-long mark even if I took this segment out completely. It's one of the best sprite death battles of all time that fits so much into a short runtime, and it's only stopped from being a 10 out of 10 by the cop-out of an ending. Oh yeah, and that bit at the start where they use a clip of Segata sighing in pain to finish his name from another clip, that's comedic genius right there.
Being a slave isn't fun.
Come on, you know it's true!
What a finale. Pokemon vs Digimon is a fucking phenomenal episode. To get the negatives out of the way first so I can take after this episode's example and end the segment off on a high note, this fight has more wonky visuals than many of the episodes that came before it. Not quite Link vs Cloud levels of Steph or Yang vs Tifa levels of seizure inducing, but there's a weird inconsistency in the model outlines. Sometimes the characters will be obviously green screened onto a background, and sometimes the lighting and shading will go haywire. When Agumon digivolves into Greymon, there's this big blast of wind and it looks like he's supposed to be roaring, but no, he's just talking normally and it looks weird. And of course, there's the big flaw with the analysis that everyone talks about. They list triple finishes and attack Charizard can do as if that move isn't a combination of 3 different Pokemon using different moves. Oh right, there's also the slave line. Well, like Ash Ketchum says, being a slave isn't fun. Charizard ain't a slave, all that sand turned your brain to mush. I think you need to stop smoking. Yeah, this comes across as, oh fuck, we had this comparison between what Goku and Superman symbolize in our last finale. How can we do that for this one? Oh hey, that Darkly animation's pretty funny, we should reference that as well. Okay, now time for gushing. As someone who's been a fan of Pokemon for over a decade and has seen one Digimon series with a completely different cast of characters about 5 to 10 years ago, the analysis here makes me so happy. I was interested to learn about Tai and Agumon, and hearing them go over various Pokemon media made me quite nostalgic. And then the fight is incredible. The escalation between Agumon's Digivolutions help keep the fight well paced. pace, the action's fun, they make good use of what little Greymon had to work with, and Charizard's versatile enough to pick up for any slack in that department. Plus, with his flight and greater mobility, it gives us some great character animation showing the differences in how they fight. I also like that Red's the only trainer calling out commands, while Tai instead gives the occasional emotional support line. Things start to pick up more and more as the fight progresses. You get this stunningly good transformation for Mega Charizard X, followed by a super satisfying smackdown which forces Greymon to revert back to Agumon. This pushes them to skip Metal Greymon altogether, which is a bit disappointing, but what can you do, and go straight for War Greymon. We get some amazing melee combat, Red uses strategy to set War Greymon up for a big hit, and Charizard takes the advantage, but Tai, now worried about his friend, takes matters into his own hands and fights Red himself. This stops Red from calling out commands, which distracts Charizard long enough for War Greymon to land one of the most devastatingly brutal hits in any death battle animation. Then he slashes Charizard's wings off, sends him crashing into Red, and he uses Terraforce to vaporize their bloodied and battered bodies. Fucking hell, the ending to this fight breaks my heart every time. Especially with Red's last words being asking Charizard if he's okay rather than worrying about his own broken body. I wish they went as far as to have the tear and all that like what they originally wanted. Then we could be looking at a contender for best death in the series, but as it is, it's still up there. There's so much to love about this episode and I could never say it all in a short ranking segment. The stellar voice acting outside of that one line, the amazing music all throughout, everything's top notch. I love this episode to death and it stands out as probably the greatest Pokemon death battle ever made. Even though the competition's not that steep, oh well. Plenty of my friends' picks for their #1 favourite episode ever come from this season, and of that selection, I wouldn't hesitate to call Pokemon vs Digimon my own favourite. Well done, Brandon, you have good taste, except when you said your second favourite episode was Danny vs Jake. I have no clue why my entire friend group is so obsessed with that episode, but to each their own, I guess.
Time to shine. Let's go get those miners.
That is not a good voice line to record Knuckles.
Donkey Kong vs Knuckles showed up Goku vs Superman 2 immediately after it came out, and that's funnier to me than any of the jokes in the episode. And considering how funny the episode is, that's saying a lot. The analysis is a lot of fun. I love how it goes into how dumb they both are while paying equal respect to their incredible strength. See, it's not that hard to show both characters an equal level of respect in a Sonic episode. I like when they delve into the bullshit in the DK cartoon, and Knuckles is one of my favourite end clips in the show. I will say though that the Banana Slammer montage went on for maybe a bit too long, and Wiz bringing up Echidna Dick is definitely something I could have done without, but it leads to some funny jokes later, so I'm fine with it. So the analysis is really fun, and the fight follows suit. There's plenty of great slapstick, as well as solid character animation showing DK's greater strength and Knuckles' greater speed. The setup here works so naturally, even if DK chucking his entire banana horde seems a bit out of character. I like that this bit here calls back to the sidebar and Knuckles analysis where they say he can run so fast the ground crumbles, the rigging's on point, the climax and the minecart's chaotic and I love it, the death's great. This fight is a non-stop thrill ride that had me laughing constantly. And that's without bringing up what this episode is most well known for, the homing coconuts and Knuckles' constant oh no's. This is an amazing running gag. Every time you think it's over, another coconut will hit Knuckles, and it's a great way to catch some people off guard. Even on a rewatch when I knew what was coming, I still found them all funny. I also like how the coconuts are worked into the choreography of the fight, stunning Knuckles long enough to allow the slower DK to attack him in the openings it gives him. This fight's so absurd and chaotic, it's a blast every time I go back to it. Easily one of my favourite sprite death battles ever made. There's very little holding it back. That said, there is still some stuff. Occasionally there will be a bit where it feels like there's a sound effect missing. The fake out at the end's funny, but it doesn't work as a way to make the audience second guess the winner when we saw Knuckles get clapped before, and the DK sprites are kinda hideous. But this episode's still able to make me adore it in spite of its handful of drawbacks. It's one of the most underrated episodes of the season, maybe even the entire series. If you haven't seen it in a while, give it a watch. Usually Mario vs Sonic debates are a nightmare, but much like Shadow vs Vegeta, this has benefited greatly by happening earlier on before they got super into power scaling, so the debate aspect doesn't become a headache. Using some of my favourite characters from both series definitely helped too.
The mask could just say no to damage! Deadpool couldn't even really hurt him!
Whoa, hold on! I've got something special for that. Carbonadium sword!
Deadpool vs Deathstroke was for a long time the most basic bitch answer someone could give when asked for their favourite episode, and I can see why, given that upon its release it was my own #1 for a few months. Of course now looking back on Goku vs Superman I definitely prefer that one, but Deadpool vs Deathstroke still remains quite possibly Torian's magnum opus for death battle. As oversaturated as Deadpool is on the show nowadays, with 2 unnecessary returns, an obnoxious cameo in Ghost Rider vs Lobo, and somehow being the single worst part of Thanos vs Darkseid, his initial appearance remains his best one. I love his dynamic with Wiz and Boomstick, how there's finally someone there to annoy them both and get them on the same page. I like how he hijacks the script, the ending to his own analysis, and even parts of Deathstroke's. Whenever there's a line I don't find funny, it's always just part of the middle of a bigger ongoing joke, so nothing in the analysis doesn't work for me. The same unfortunately can't be said about the fight. Not that it isn't stellar, but it is where all my issues with the episode come in. The sniper shots being too loud in that one scene, the frame rate dips, and the shit death, there are definitely issues. There's also some dated early season 2 visuals, but compared to the stiffness of Godzilla vs. Gamera and the general ugliness of Terminator vs. Robocop, this may as well be a Pixar film by comparison. The rest of the fight perfectly encapsulates what makes season 2's peaks amongst the best in the show, with some great choreography, good use of the set piece that takes them to multiple locations, an expansive use of the characters' various weaponry, more than one track to allow them to go for different tones in different scenes, it's all there. And of course, being a Deadpool episode, you'd expect there to be funny banter, and there is. I like the contrast in Deadpool never shutting the fuck up next to Deathstroke, who's just fed up with his shit. The best example of this is obviously the dance fight. Between that and the pitching for Jack vs. Afro being hand-drawn, the animators clearly make their best decisions for what to do with these episodes while completely wasted. I like what follows it as well, with the chaotic car crash on the bridge, Deadpool getting hit with a flaming semi-truck as a callback to the analysis, and the fun ending where Deadpool has to rip off his limbs and reattach them, while Deathstroke recovers from a single stab wound to show the difference in their healing factors. Like I said before, the death that follows it is pretty weak, but I like basically everything else about the ending to the fight. This isn't Torian's absolute best episode, but it was our first showing of what he could really do when he brings his A-game. When almost every issue the fight has can be attributed to rendering issues or technical limitations, it goes to show that he's very talented at what he does. It sucks that he's left the show, but at least he was able to give us some fucking banger episodes like this.
Funniest shit I've ever seen!
Besides the original Goku vs. Superman, Hercule Satan vs. Dan Hibiki stands tall as my favourite Dragon Ball Z battle, and considering its competition, that's nothing to scoff at. This is a very unique episode in that the analysis focuses on mocking the characters rather than hyping them up. Typically that makes for a bad episode, or at least a bad analysis, but with Hercule vs. Dan, that's kind of the point of their characters and the matchup as a whole. Plus it's funny, so there's that. And it's not all cyberbullying. They do bring up their greatest strengths and even compliment them at points. The fight's amazing as well. Much like the analysis, it turns what would be a downside for any lesser episode into its greatest strengths. The complete lack of impact on so many of these hits thanks to weak sound design and lack of visual effects perfectly captures the exact kind of tone a fight like this should be going for. There's a lot of stopping and starting as well, but again, it fits this fight and it's funny. Already the fight's off to a great start, but then we get to the crusty capsule PNG spilling out of Hercule's robe. From this point on, the fight gets even more chaotic and fun, with some neat references from other franchises scattered around the arena. Some of them appear and disappear between shots, but who cares, it's funny. The comedy is the episode's strongest aspect, and that's partly thanks to the amazing voice acting. I wasn't into Kage's Hercule voice at first, but his performance grew on me as the fight went on. I loved hearing him bullshit his way out of things every time Dan got the slightest upper hand. Nick was also really fun as the announcer, but it's Brad Venable as Dan Hibiki who steals the show here. He has such high levels of energy and charisma, I love every single one of his lines, with the one I found the funniest being his reaction to the jetpack stalling. Sadly, Brad passed away in early 2021. I'm not super familiar with his work, but his death battle performances as Dan and Otacon were both incredible. What a coincidence, two characters who get some super badass scenes despite being bullied in the analysis. Oh yeah, Dan has one of those. When Dan activates the Satsui no Hado, the fight goes from goofy and fun to fucking chilling in a matter of seconds, thanks to the incredible music and line delivery. This is unironically one of the best scenes in the entire season, and it's undercut with a joke. Again, a fault for any other episode, but Hercule vs. Dan turns that shit into one of its greatest strengths. Then Hercule's put in the exact same boat. He gets a cool final beatdown on Dan, and his moment's undercut as a rogue capsule lands into Dan's mouth and explodes into a jukebox. This is, without a hint of irony, one of the best death battle episodes ever made. What it lacks in cool action, it more than makes up for with how funny and unique it is. It was a delight to rewatch, and I had a big smile on my face the entire time. Sprite episodes don't get better than this.
Raiden is pelvic thrusting in victory.
Wolverine vs. Raiden is held in very high regard by a lot of people, with it being one of the most common answers I've heard for favourite death battle episode. And it's not even remotely hard to see why. The animation is one of Torian's best, with some amazing choreography and an incredible sense of speed, with some pretty cool weapon trails to help make it easy to keep track of what's happening. The fight has a few jokes I find funny, it finds unique ways to incorporate some of their abilities into the fight, like Wolverine's sense of smell and Raiden's ability to absorb electrolytes, and I find Wolverine's healing animations weirdly satisfying to watch for some reason. The peak of this fight is at the end though. While the Berserker Wolverine transformation feels lacking in impact, Raiden's transformation into Jack the Ripper more than picks up the slack. What follows is a final showdown that takes the speed and intensity of the fight to the next level, with a very brief but amazing one-stroke duel. Wolverine's on the losing end of it, and on my first viewing I was expecting him to regenerate and turn the tables. Raiden sweeps his leg and flips him over, then goes for the head, and I was still fully expecting the sword to get caught on his neck and for Logan to make his big comeback. And then we get this shot. To this day, no other episode in this series has been able to match the jaw on the floor shock that Wolverine's death gave me. This is one of the best finishers of not just the season, but of Death Battle as a whole. Raiden's victory didn't come cheap either. Beyond the arm that he lost, you can see the insane amount of slashes and spilled blood all over his body, and while he didn't take as much punishment as Logan did, that's understandable given that his greater speed would let him dodge more attacks, and also Wolverine's healing factor did need to be shown off more anyway. Oh, and the analysis is good too. Jokes are solid, conclusions in depth, I like it, but the fight overshadows it immensely. What can I even say that holds the episode back? That the setup's a little weak? The fact that the city's crawling with metal gears and then suddenly they all vanish once the fight starts? That one kind of odd line? If that's the level I have to go in order to find anything actually bad about this fight, then that should be telling about how amazing it is. It's not really one I have particularly much to say about, but it's fucking phenomenal and easily one of the best episodes of the entire series. I can legitimately count on one hand the amount of times they've topped it since it came out. And would you believe me if I said this was the lesser of the two Metal Gear episodes? Don't worry, we'll get there soon enough. But there's still one more episode to go before that.
I'm not playing God. All this time, I've been playing
The new FNAF, and it's pretty good.
By now, I've made my feelings on Marvel vs. DC fights very clear. Not only do I find them repetitive, but they also aren't usually hitting very high levels of quality relative to a bunch of other episodes. And many of my least favourite episodes of all time are Marvel vs. DC's. And not just because of the franchise pairings. Some of my favourite episodes have these two series against each other as well. Hulk vs. Doomsday and Deadpool vs. Deathstroke are both examples of how a Marvel vs. DC episode can go above and beyond to become something truly special. And out of a selection of, at this point I think 25, none can even hold a candle to Iron Man vs. Lex Luthor. The analysis is great. It's not one of my favourites ever or anything, but it's fun and informative, and besides, the fight alone is more than enough to carry it up to this high placement. This episode has some of the best pacing and character animation in the entire series. Tony starts at a disadvantage and Lex knows this, so he doesn't feel the need to try, but then when he realises the EMP could cause him some issues, he starts taking the fight seriously and bodies Tony as quickly as possible. This leads into the Hulkbuster scene where Tony matches Lex blow for blow, so Lex has to short the suit out, and as soon as he no longer perceives Tony as a threat, he stops trying again. Then we get the satellite laser leading into the Endosim suit, followed by the best line and most satisfying beatdown in Death Battle history. And that beatdown has another contender for the best interaction in the show. Not quite as good as I've been playing human, but in any lesser episode, this would have been the highlight. I could never do this ending justice with words. It does such a good job getting the adrenaline flowing, and I love it to death. That scene alone made it my favourite episode for so long. Not that the rest of it is lacking though. While it doesn't use a whole lot of Iron Man suits, it makes the most out of the few it does use. It knows exactly when to switch between them and how much of a fight they should be putting up against the war suit. There are so many great references, from lines to various attacks from throughout their series, to the shit in Pepper's building from other series. Every time I watch it, I'll pick up on something new or remember a small detail that I'd forgotten about. No other episode is able to do that to this extent. I think the only real flaws with the animation are the dated visuals and like one line from Lex where Gianni slips into his Sweet Tooth voice. But considering how poorly the visuals of other Season 2 episodes have aged, I can cope with Herobrine Lex and the occasional wonky looking lighting effect. More than any other season, the 3D fights in Season 2 excel with their storytelling, feeling like legit crossovers more than just versus animations, and Iron Man vs. Lex Luthor is one of the shining examples of that. It also feels like it takes part in a bigger world that has more going on than just this fight thanks to the funny cameo from Pepper at the end. Trying to fit my feelings on this episode into a 2 or 3 minute segment of a ranking is tough because there's so much for me to say, and I wish I'd gone more into detail back in the Lex vs. Doom review. I think at this point, Tony vs. Lex deserves its own video. It's such a special episode to me, and I don't think it'll ever stop being one of my favourites. As for now, this is the gold standard for comic book fights on this show. Here's hoping eventually something will come around to surpass it. I mean, I didn't think anything could for so long. Saitama vs. Popeye recently came along and did it, but there is one more. And what do you know, it was the very next 3D fight Torian did.
Who throws microwaves at people?
I'm pretty sure this marks the first time I'm covering this episode on this channel that isn't text-to-speech, huh? Had Nem not already said about everything I would want to say, I would have probably given Solid Snake vs. Sam Fisher its own dedicated video. Not just because it's good enough to warrant it, which it is, but this short segment could never even begin to cover all the elements that make this such an outstanding episode. If you do want that extra deep dive into it though, like I said, Nem's already done one and he said about everything I would, so I'll link that in the description, go check that out if you're interested. The analysis is good with plenty of jokes I like, the conclusion covers all the bases it needs to, good stuff all around. But what would this episode be without its fight scene? With a simple but effective setup, some nice choreography, solid enough voice acting, this fight was already set to be pretty good. But as it goes along, it picks up drastically. It turns into this big game of cat and mouse with the characters not only trying to kill each other, but coordinate with their partners and get the USB drive. So there are 3 layers to this fight, all of which have me invested and interested to see what they do with them. I like how this episode uses its set piece to allow for a greater variety of locations used throughout the fight, and the dim lighting of the building is used to hide any of the Season 2 ugliness in the models. The varied locations are one of the greatest strengths of the earlier 3D fights. Nowadays they're confined to like 1 or 2 locations. Speaking of that, another one of the greatest strengths in Season 2 episodes is their ability to tell a story, as if this was an official crossover with a fight as a bonus. This episode especially excels there, with whoever has the USB being the main thing that pushes the plot along. This helps to make the fight even more engaging and gets me actually invested in who would win, compared to, oh, you bumped into me, we gotta fight now. The extended length of earlier 3D battles also helps this episode out, since it means the story they want to tell gets to be told in full without sacrificing any of the combat. If they had to cut it down from 6 minutes to 3 like we did nowadays, the fight's greatest moments wouldn't hit nearly as hard, since there wouldn't be as much build up to result in a more satisfying payoff. And while we're on the topic of the fight's greatest moments, the fight's amazing for the most part, but it's in the last minute and a half where it goes from phenomenal to my absolute favourite episode they have ever done. Otacon, after being absent for a few minutes, is able to hack into Sam and Grimm's comm line, bringing down the plane that the latter's in. He's not even one of the combatants in the episode, and he gets one of my favourite moments of the season. It's especially helped by the presentation and the line delivery, the latter of which being thanks to the late Brad Venable giving one of the best performances Death Battle has ever heard. The lights in the building go out as Sam heads to the room that Snake's in, and then we get this shot here of the pitch black room, illuminated only by Sam's headlights and Snake's cigarette, as we get a line in Snake's head that references a line from his series, which also shows how he's come to respect Sam's skill over the course of the fight, and the solid eye lights up which hard cuts the darkness. We can't see anything, only the occasional flash from their guns firing, as Otacon calls out to Snake as a reference to his most iconic line. Otacon shutting Grimm down was a fantastic scene, but this one right here is just breathtaking. This is this episode's equivalent to the what did you take exchange from Tony vs Lex. A fucking outstanding sequence that would have been more than enough to dwarf the best bits from plenty of other episodes, but it isn't even the best part of this one. As the lights come back on, Snake suplexes Sam which disarms him with his gun. All the two of them have left are their knives. Their guns are either lost or out of ammo, their partners can no longer help, Snake's gadgets have all been disabled, they have no more tricks left. No easy ways out, no escape, no more sneaking around. This is what it comes down to, a test of pure skill. This is my favourite scene in all of Death Battle. It doesn't have me in complete shock like the ending to Wolverine vs Raiden, or get the adrenaline pumping as much as episodes like Tony vs Lex, but in terms of drawing me in every time like it's my first watch, getting me invested in the outcome and bringing the episode to a satisfying conclusion, I can't think of any episode that does it better than this. It feels cinematic in a way that nothing else of the show has surpassed for me. Not even some of my other favourites like Yoda vs King Mickey or Jack vs Afro. The perfectly fitting music, cinematography, choreography, and a simple yet oh so satisfying killing move make this ending so special to me. It feels more climactic and conclusive than any season finale could ever dream of, to the point where if this was the series finale, I would have been content. Divine Identity, beyond just fitting the characters so damn well to the point where I used to mistake it for Metal Gear music, has this feeling of finality that makes this feel like the end. And for these characters, they know it will be for one of them, and they're determined to make sure that they'll either be the only one walking out alive, or go down swinging before their death. This episode is my favourite one that Death Battle's ever done, with only Saitama vs Popeye contesting its censored release. Season 2 for sure had its fair share of garbage, but the occasional filler or outright bad episode was more than worth it when we got episodes as good as this one. Oh boy, that took a while. That took a lot out of me, so I'm not going to keep this outro going for too long. I'll go more in depth to my overall thoughts on the shorter seasons when those videos come around, but this one in particular is only getting a brief summary because this video doesn't need to go on for much longer. This is better than season 1 for sure, we'll see how the other seasons compare when we get there. If you want to see the scores I'd give each episode, then I'll have those on screen right now. I love this season a lot. While a good chunk of it was fairly unimpressive, the best stuff outshines most of the rest of the series. Hell, it has more episodes I love than most seasons have episodes making up their entire season list. And it also has as many episodes I consider amazing, as I'm expecting season 3 to have episodes I consider good. Speaking of season 3, that looks like it'll be quite the rocky road, but maybe it'll surprise me and be one of my favourites, who knows. I'm gonna head out now because I am very tired, see you next week.